For today's critical thought, I've been keeping a lot of video drafts on various topics of difficulty. Why are games too easy? Why are games too hard? And all that. So I figured, instead of trying to go through all of them, we're going to condense it all for a kind of lesson on difficulty design and what it means to design an easy, medium, hard, or masochistic game in 2024. As always, when it comes to discussions on difficulty, this is quite difficult to do. Anyone can make an incredibly masochistically nightmarish hard game, or they can make a walk in the park where you literally can't get hurt, can't lose, and it's just you walking from point A to point B. But getting difficulty right is incredibly challenging to do. And there's a lot of different areas where I can kind of springboard or get it started on. So let's talk about the extremes. If you've been on any kind of video game, social media, Twitter, X, whatever you want to call it, you've probably seen the meme of someone saying easy games are okay because at the end of the day, we just want to have fun. And that is always one of the more annoying memes when it comes to difficulty because it assumes that if a game isn't easy, then it can't be fun. For some people, fun means being at 5 health points of health left, fighting a boss who just activated their desperation phase, and now the entire screen is filled with bouncing, homing, multicolored bullets. Or you're doing something like Ultra Kill, and Sisyphus Prime is yeeting you around the map like a Dragon Ball Z episode. What? Just because that is fun for someone else may just want to play a game that's about a good story, or about very simple puzzles, and stuff like that. And as I said a minute ago, the extremes of difficulty, too hard and too easy, aren't where you want to build your game around. When we're discussing difficulty in any game, be it a puzzle game, story game, shmup, two-hoo, whatever, the first thing you need to decide on is who is the intended audience of your game. And more specifically, what is the skill level of that audience? Because this can vary very wildly between different games, studios, modders, etc. If you're building a 2D platformer, you could be aiming for an audience of someone who has played every Mario game. What about every Sonic game? What about someone who has mastered every single Kaizo hack that's out there and can beat them all blindfolded? What about someone who's never touched a platformer before, who has no idea what platforming or platforming is? They may never even have heard of Mario before. And while you can certainly joke about that last point, it's still something to understand. There is certainly an untapped market for a lot of genres in terms of creating the first game for that genre. Something that you can play if you've never experienced a genre before is an incredibly solid entry-level take. And that can work for any genre under the sun. But figuring out who the market is, or the intended skill level for your game, this is where you start figuring out what is going to be the average experience. And average, again, can be very different based on that audience. If we're talking about a straightforward shooter or a Doom-like, average could be just knowing how to circle strafe around an enemy. For another game, it could be having to master multi-button directional combos and perfect parry timings. But understanding what is the average experience or the average intended experience for your game is when you can start bumping things either up or down, depending upon the difficulty level, and making your game more approachable. Because here's the thing, at the end of the day, even if you are designing a super brutally difficult, or even a complete cakewalk, walk in the park on cake style game, you should still be looking at ways of turning up or turning down the heat. Because this is a great way to expand your own knowledge and skill of game design. Some of the best games that we've played are those that do a fantastic job in terms of their difficulty in one of two ways. One is designing a very laser focused average or default difficulty, and that's it. So this is when we talk about stuff like Souls-like games, where again, everyone who plays a Souls-like game is playing on one single difficulty. But how you experience that, again, is very different. Someone may play Elden Ring using every single summon under the sun. Someone may want to play that game with no clothes, just punching everything at soul level 1 and see if they can do it. The other way is designing interesting and unique difficulty settings that not only just raise or lower stats, which again I'm not a huge fan of, but legitimately change or offer a different experience, going from easy, medium, hard, super hard, Josh must die difficulty, and so on. Because this lets you do some very interesting things, and more importantly, it allows you to kind of section this stuff off or quarter it off from people who may not want that. A really good example of this are survival games. The survival crafter genre can vary very wildly depending on the difficulty that the player chooses. Many of them have that ultra difficult, you stub your toe, you develop tetanus, your toe has to come off, you're now having psychological damage, you're now going to die and you've lost. Or they have complete sandbox mode, where if you want to spend the next 10 hours recreating your favorite castles, mansions, or whatever in the game, you can do that. Again, it's the joy of stuff like Minecraft, Subnautica, and many more. And neither one of those approaches should be considered wrong for a game. But again, it depends on what the intended experience is, and then figuring out how to push it up or push it down. Another good example are action-based games that change the flow and structure of their levels, where it's not just about saying, okay, on normal difficulty, the enemy takes 2 bullets a kill. On hard difficulty, they take 7 points a kill. It's instead, okay, on normal difficulty, this encounter is 3 handgun guys. On hard, it's now 2 shotgun guys and a sniper. And when you start thinking about your mechanics and your difficulty like this, it starts to lead to more interesting discussions on level and environmental design. So here's a pop quiz for everyone. Which one of these sounds harder to you? A platforming level that requires the player to make 3 one-character wide platform jumps, along with trying to dodge a few bullets like going horizontally across the screen? Or another one where the player has to make jumps across basic platforms, but those Medusa heads that we all know and love are going around their pattern, and maybe the lights start flickering on and off, making it hard to see. Again, under those two contexts, it's kind of hard to tell what is considered the harder version. This is something I talked a lot about in my first deep dive book on platforming, that you can't easily quantify difficulty when we're talking about very minute things. When you start throwing things in the extreme ends, very easy or very hard, then it gets far easier to decide. If I'm designing a platforming level that is 57 pixel precise jumps around moving spikes while Kaizo traps will activate, all while homing bullet bills are moving 80 miles an hour across the screen at the player, that's going to be very difficult to do. But is it very interesting to do? And this gets at kind of one of the major through lines of difficulty that I always like to talk about on any one of these topics. When you are trying to create interesting challenges, the player has to be able to understand, what is the game asking me to do, and are these mechanics allowing me to do so? Because again, you can set something very difficult. If we're making a first-person shooter and you give the player a super close-range shotgun, that let's say it does a one-shot kill anything at close range, but every level puts the player in wide-open areas with hit-scan super snipers on every corner, that the second you walk in, they're already training their gun on you and they're about to headshot you, that gun doesn't really matter. This was one of the issues that I had when I played something like Trepang 2 versus Sulaco. Trepang 2 finds or is about that kind of fear-based design, where everything is supposed to be moving very rapidly. Enemies can just, a second you step out, they're already locked on and shooting at you, and they're doing lots of damage. And the whole game is balanced around the slow-mo, bullet time, however you want to call it. But if you don't have that, you're kind of SOL in a lot of cases. Now, you could be that super pro, you are the one FPS player where you don't need bullet time, you are your own bullet time. But if you don't have that, it can be very frustrating to play. Whereas with a game like Severed Steel, as another example before we get to Sulaco, Severed Steel is built on slow-mo as well. You are going to be diving and jumping and bullet sliding and whatever else you want to call it all around the map, and you can only take one hit before you're killed. The game is balanced, however, around the fact that as long as you are in the air or doing something cool, you're invulnerable. Yeah, they could shoot all the bullets in the world at you. They're not going to hit you because you have your cool shield on. It's still a hard game, but the tools that are provided by the player are vastly different, and that gives it an incredibly unique feel to it. Now, with something like Sulaco, it has a completely different sense of gunplay. It's more grounded than, say, an Ultra Kill, maybe something like Doom Eternal. Enemies still hit hard as heck, and they will be attacking you from every angle. But it's not a case where the enemy is given so much of a unique advantage that supersedes everything that you have. I have a very powerful shotgun. I get next to an enemy, doesn't matter what difficulty we're on, it's going to take a lot of damage and more than likely will be killed, unless you're talking about kind of a mini boss or elite level enemy. And that's the point. When you're playing something like Sulaco, the enemies are not being tuned differently, or at least as much as I could tell in terms of behavior on going from the easy to the hard, or the hardest difficulty. They're becoming more aggressive, but they're still keeping the same basic stats. If you can easily kill an enemy on easy mode, you should be able to do that on normal, hard, and so on. It's very much in the same principle as Doom Eternal. And these kinds of games give a good way or a good idea of measuring difficulty in your game. You want the player to be able to make mistakes. You want them not to be playing this game at the super optimal speedrunner min-max, I will beat the 7-hour game in 27 minutes or less level of skill. You want them to be able to, let's say, miss a few shots, or maybe take a hit when they weren't really thinking about it. If you're playing on the super masochistic difficulty, then yeah, you can, tear off all the safety tape you want, get rid of that yellow paint, just throw everything you have at the player. But again, the extremes of difficulty are going to be more on the minute side of your audience. Most people who will play a game will typically go for normal or what's considered the intended experience. And on that level, they should feel like the game is being fair to them. And like I said, with something like with Doom Eternal, being able to play that game or understand its mechanics will allow the player to go up in difficulty. If enemies are doing more damage or they're more aggressive, if the player is still able to master these mechanics, they can handle it. And if it's too aggressive, then they can lower it down. Another really important example of this kind of being able to adjust the flow of the game style difficulty would be something like Ultra Kill. Now, Ultra Kill again has multiple difficulty levels, and I don't believe the super hardest one is in just yet. But I was watching footage of someone who's never touched an FPS before play Ultra Kill on the absolute bottom, ultra easy difficulty. And it slows the game down dramatically. Enemies go from moving like this across the screen to moving like this. And at that level, if you've never played an FPS before, you should still be able to handle it. Now, is that definitely going to be for the average Ultra Kill fan? Definitely not. Is it going to be for the person who has P-ranked every single level? Probably not as well. But it's a great way to introduce someone who's never touched an FPS or who's never touched this style of FPS and give them a way to start learning it. Will they one day get to the absolute hardest difficulty and play through the game? Probably not. Maybe a few will at least bump things up a little bit. But trying to accommodate multiple people is what you want in terms of difficulty design. But again, it will always hinge on what your intended experience is. You cannot adjust or change that once you've said. Again, you can add more difficulty levels, you can add more easier difficulty levels, but you do not want to change your intended experience. The reason why is that this is changing the market for your game. If you're marketing your game as super easy, very fun, delightful game, you don't need to do a lot to play, and then you change it so that every enemy will one-shot kill the player instantly if they see them, a lot of people will be rightfully upset with you. Just as if you promise a super difficult game, and then you completely gut all the mechanics, all the difficulty of your game for your normal mode. This again was something that happened with Soldiers, that after the game was released, they kind of did this like emergency just go through and lower difficulty every which way. And it annoyed a lot of their fans because it's not fixing the level design, it's not fixing the enemy design. You're just severely gutting everything else around it. And it's why, again, that you want this average experience. And you do not want to change or have specific features that people are complaining about hidden in the menus. Because again, whatever is your intended experience, that is how someone turns on the game, hit start or click or hit enter, and that's it. If someone finds your game annoying or frustrating to play, do not hide an approachability or an accessibility feature that's going to fix that. Because most people are not going to see that. And again, if the majority of the people who play your game find X in your game super annoying and frustrating to play, you should consider, is that part of my intended experience? Because what you could do is have the easier version of the game be the intended version, and then have that harder modifier as the challenge mode. Remember, as part of like one of the more interesting psychological tricks, if you want someone to do something, you want to reward them for it instead of punish them. Some people will like that punishment. They will like that extra bite and sting and teeth and any other metaphor that you can think of for your game. But again, that will always be a smaller and more niche aspect of your audience. It's still good to have that. And again, as part of the discussion on difficulty design, thinking of unique and interesting ways to add or reduce difficulty to your game will make you a better designer. Because this will allow you to craft multiple experiences of your game beyond that intended one. And again, most people are going to stick with normal, average, however you want to call it. But being able to come up with these unique ways will allow you to come up with more interesting design challenges for not only that game, but for future games as well. Maybe something is considered too hard for your game in this iteration. Who knows? Maybe that could be part of another game down the line. Maybe there's a very interesting mode that inspires you to create something entirely original out of it. Again, these are the things that you can do when you're not just thinking about difficulty in terms of stats. Enemies take 50 times more damage. Enemies deal 50 times less damage. This kind of stuff, it's not changing your level design. It's not changing how someone experiences your mechanics. And that is what you want out of good difficulty. Your intended, normal, however you want to call it, setting, that should be the best way to experience your game. If someone can only experience your game on the story mode, super easy mode, however you want to call it, that's not a failure on them. That's a failure on you to create a solid baseline for your game. Because if you don't have that, you are leaving a lot of fans and potential consumers out to dry, or hanging out to dry. Because yes, if your game has a very bad easy mode, a very bad normal mode, but fantastic hard mode, you'll attract those hardcore fans. But a lot of people are not going to come back for your next game or wait for you to try and patch or fix things. So to wrap things up for this critical thought, difficulty design is something that, again, it is very hard to define for a lot of people. One person's super easy mode that they just close their eyes and the entire game is cake for them is someone else's brutally difficult challenge that they will never achieve. And understanding who your market is for your game is how you can start then putting together interesting challenges and then ways of making your game feel legitimately different for each setting. Because if you can get that intended experience right, you can then start thinking about, well, what would be an easier version of this? What would be a harder version of this? And it is more work. That, I think, is a good final point to land on for this video. This adds more time and energy to your game. It's a lot easier, again, to just tweak stats. But tweaking stats will never fix or help any inherent pain points or frustrations with your game. Enemy takes, 10 times more damage or 10 times less damage to kill. Okay, that's great. If the person can't figure out how to properly swing their sword, or is frustrated by the menuing, the inventory, or how hard it is to just walk around, that's not going to matter. And again, this is also where playtesting can come in, and why it's good to look at a wide spectrum of people in terms of their skill levels to figure out, okay, how does someone who has never played the genre before look at this game? How does someone who has mastered the genre look at this game? Because then you can start putting things together. So for those of you watching, can you think of other examples that we haven't mentioned in this video that have really solid difficulty settings? And again, not just making things harder, but can you think of examples that did a great job of making things easier without diluting or removing mechanics or the intended experience? That's a lot harder, isn't it? Let me know in the comments down below. Thanks for tuning in, and let me know when a game finally adds in the Josh Core difficulty to it. Thanks for watching, and a special thank you to our Patreon supporters. If you enjoyed the video, do the YouTubing stuff, be sure to visit our Discord and Patreon, and you're interested in more in my thoughts on design, check out my game design books.